Your attention isn't weak, it's being hijacked. Discover how to reclaim unshakable focus by working with your brain, not against it. The Focused Path. Audiobook. Introduction. You begin each day with determination, armed with a clear vision of what needs to be accomplished. Yet as evening arrives, your most important work remains untouched, buried beneath a mountain of smaller tasks, digital distractions, and the constant pull of notifications. This isn't an occasional occurrence. It's become your daily reality, leaving you exhausted not from productivity, but from the endless battle with your own attention. In today's hyper-connected world, your mind faces unprecedented challenges. Every app, platform, and device competes relentlessly for your attention, each engineered by teams of experts to hijack your focus through sophisticated psychological triggers. The modern environment isn't just distracting. It's deliberately designed to fragment your concentration, scattering your mental energy across an infinite landscape of shallow engagement. But here's what's crucial to understand. Your struggle with focus isn't a personal failure. It's not a deficit of willpower or discipline. Instead, it represents a fundamental misalignment between how your attention naturally works and how you're trying to direct it. Think of your attention like water flowing through a landscape. Water doesn't fight its way uphill. It naturally follows the path of least resistance. Similarly, your attention moves effortlessly when aligned with its natural tendencies. This brings us to the central metaphor that will transform how you approach focus: the garden and the wilderness. Your mental landscape resembles a space where a cultivated garden meets wild, untamed territory. Without clear boundaries and intentional design, the wilderness of distraction inevitably encroaches, overtaking the productive space you're trying to create. But when you understand how to structure your environment, both internal and external, remarkable focus emerges naturally, just as a well-designed garden channels water exactly where it needs to go. This book offers a revolutionary approach to achieving unshakable focus. Instead of fighting against your mind's natural tendencies, you'll learn to work with them. Rather than pursuing focus through exhausting force of will, you'll discover how to create conditions where deep concentration becomes your default state. Traditional productivity advice fails because it attempts to change the gardener rather than redesign the garden. It emphasizes discipline over design, willpower over wisdom. This book takes the opposite approach. You'll learn to structure your environment, routines, and mindset in ways that make procrastination not just less frequent, but fundamentally impossible when the right conditions are in place. The path to extraordinary focus doesn't require you to become someone different. It simply requires you to arrange your world in alignment with who you already are. As you turn these chapters, you'll discover how small shifts in your environment and perspective can create dramatic transformations in your ability to concentrate on what truly matters. Your journey to unshakable focus begins now. Let's explore how to cultivate your garden of attention, creating a sanctuary where your most important work can flourish. Chapter 1. The Water and the Channel. Imagine trying to force water uphill. You could expend tremendous energy, employ sophisticated pumps and mechanisms, and maintain constant vigilance to keep the water flowing against its nature. The moment you stop exerting this force, the water immediately returns to its natural downward path. This is precisely how most people approach focus, through constant, exhausting force of will against their mind's natural tendencies. Your brain, shaped by millions of years of evolution, operates according to precise neurological principles. The default mode network, a fundamental system within your brain, automatically directs attention towards certain activities while moving it away from others. This isn't a flaw or weakness. It's sophisticated engineering designed to conserve mental energy and maintain awareness of potentially important environmental changes. Traditional productivity advice creates an adversarial relationship with these natural mental processes. It positions focus as something to be conquered through discipline and willpower, treating your mind's natural tendencies as enemies to be overcome. This approach inevitably fails because it works against your brain's fundamental operating system rather than with it. Consider the profound difference between pushing focus and channeling attention. When you push focus, you engage in a constant battle against your mind's natural flow, depleting valuable mental energy that could be directed toward actual productive work. But when you channel attention, you create conditions that align with your brain's natural tendencies, allowing focus to emerge effortlessly. Water provides the perfect metaphor for understanding this distinction. In an unstructured landscape, water disperses randomly, creating chaos rather than useful flow. But with thoughtful engineering, through channels, dams, and proper grading, the same water flows exactly where it's needed without requiring constant intervention. Your attention follows identical principles. The conventional approach to focus typically looks like this. You sit down to work, immediately trying to force your mind to concentrate through sheer willpower. Your thoughts naturally drift, so you aggressively pull them back. This mental tug-of-war continues until you're exhausted, often with minimal progress to show for your efforts. The alignment-based approach transforms this dynamic entirely. Instead of fighting against mental drift, you first create conditions that naturally draw your attention toward the intended target. You engineer your environment and mental landscape to make focus the path of least resistance, rather than a constant upstream battle. You might worry that this emphasis on alignment somehow absolves personal responsibility or diminishes the importance of discipline. In reality, working with your mind's natural flow requires greater initial awareness and strategic thinking than simply trying to force focus through willpower. The key difference lies in when and how you expend energy. Traditional approaches demand constant energy expenditure to maintain focus. The alignment-based method requires more upfront investment in design, but creates sustainable conditions where focus emerges naturally. By understanding these fundamental principles of attention, you lay the groundwork for transforming your relationship with focus entirely. Instead of exhausting yourself fighting against your mind's natural tendencies, you can learn to create environments and conditions where deep concentration becomes your default state. This shift from force to flow, from resistance to alignment, forms the foundation for all the practical strategies we'll explore in the coming chapters. The key lies not in becoming someone with superhuman concentration abilities, but in arranging your world to work with, rather than against your brain's natural patterns. When you stop treating your mind's tendencies as obstacles to overcome and start viewing them as forces to be channeled, you unlock an entirely new level of sustainable focus. Much like sailing with the wind rather than fighting against it, this alignment transforms what was once an exhausting battle into an effortless glide. Your brain already knows how to focus intensely. You've experienced those moments of complete absorption where time seems to disappear. The challenge isn't learning new mental skills, but creating conditions where this natural capacity can emerge uninhibited. Chapter 2: The Garden and the Wilderness. Standing at the edge of a potential garden space, you face an expanse that could become anything or nothing. Without boundaries, this open terrain remains undefined, its potential unrealized. This same dynamic plays out in your mental landscape every day. Without clear delineation between spaces for focused work and the ever-encroaching wilderness of distraction, your attention disperses across an endless frontier of possibilities. Your mind's attentional space operates according to fundamental principles of territory and containment. Just as a garden requires walls, fences, or hedges to exist as distinct from the surrounding wilderness, your focus requires clear boundaries to maintain its integrity. This isn't about restriction, it's about definition. Without these edges, there is no garden, only wilderness. The modern world presents an unprecedented challenge to maintaining these boundaries. The same devices that enable unprecedented productivity also create unprecedented vulnerability to distraction. Each notification, each open tab, each unfinished task represents a breach in your attentional walls, allowing the wilderness to steadily encroach upon your cultivated space. This invasion occurs across three critical territories: physical space, digital space, and mental space. Your physical environment sends constant signals about what deserves attention. A cluttered desk broadcasts competing priorities. An open door invites interruption. Each visual trigger initiates a split-second negotiation with focus. In digital space, the boundaries become even more crucial, yet harder to maintain. Unlike physical spaces, digital environments default to constant connection and infinite scroll. Without deliberately established limits, these spaces optimize for distraction rather than concentration. The absence of natural stopping cues means your attention continues flowing unless explicitly contained. Your mental space, perhaps the most crucial territory, requires the subtlest boundaries. This internal landscape determines how you process both external stimuli and internal impulses. Without clear mental boundaries, every thought becomes an invitation to diversion, every emotion a potential disruption to focus. The territory principle emerges from understanding these spaces. Focused territories must be actively defended through regular recommitment and boundary maintenance. This isn't a one-time setup, but an ongoing process of cultivation. The most focused individuals aren't those with inexhaustible willpower, but those who have designed their environments to require minimal willpower expenditure. This principle reveals why traditional advice about trying harder to focus inevitably fails. Willpower alone cannot compensate for poorly defined boundaries. When your attentional space lacks clear edges, maintaining focus becomes an exhausting exercise in constant vigilance. But when boundaries are well designed, focus flows naturally within its contained space. The resistance to establishing these boundaries often stems from misunderstanding their purpose. Boundaries around technology use, availability to others, or work hours can feel like limitations on freedom or productivity. However, these borders actually create freedom by eliminating the constant cognitive burden of choice and negotiation. They transform focus from an active struggle into a passive state supported by your environment. This boundary-setting process begins with honest assessment. Where does the wilderness consistently invade your attention despite your best intentions? Which spaces, physical, digital, or mental, lack clear definition? These points of invasion aren't personal failures, but opportunities for strategic redesign. Creating effective boundaries doesn't require dramatic transformation. Small, strategic adjustments to your environment can significantly impact your ability to maintain focus. A simple door closed during deep work, a phone placed in another room, or a clear end time for your workday. Each boundary creates a micro garden where attention can flourish. Your ability to focus correlates directly with the clarity of these boundaries. When your attentional space blends seamlessly with the wilderness of potential distraction, maintaining concentration requires constant effort. But when you establish and maintain clear borders, focus becomes your default state rather than an achievement. The transformation of your attentional space into a well-defined garden creates the foundation for sustained focus. These boundaries don't constrain your potential, they create the conditions essential for deep work to flourish. By understanding and implementing the territory principle, you begin the crucial process of reclaiming your attention from the wilderness of distraction. Just as a garden wall protects delicate plants from harsh elements, your carefully crafted boundaries shield your most valuable work from the constant erosion of interruption. Each border you establish strengthens your ability to engage deeply with what matters most, allowing your natural capacity for focus to emerge without strain. This isn't about limiting yourself. It's about creating a sanctuary where your finest work can take root and grow. Chapter 3. The Invisible Architect. The profound influence of the environment on focus becomes strikingly apparent when you notice the dramatic shifts in your cognitive performance across different locations. The same task that feels insurmountable in your home office flows effortlessly at a library or cafe. This isn't coincidence or imagination. It's environmental determinism at work, a fundamental principle revealing how your surroundings shape your mental state and behavior far more powerfully than willpower alone. Your brain constantly processes environmental signals that bypass conscious thought, automatically triggering either focused or distracted states. This process evolved to help our ancestors rapidly assess and respond to their surroundings without conscious deliberation. Today, this same mechanism means your environment exerts a constant, invisible influence on your ability to concentrate. Most people's work environments evolve accidentally rather than through intentional design. Your desk placement, lighting, background sounds, and object arrangement likely emerge through convenience or circumstance rather than strategic consideration of their impact on focus. This unplanned evolution explains why certain spaces consistently undermine your concentration despite your best intentions to stay focused within them. The environmental impact on attention operates through 4 distinct but interconnected dimensions. Your visual landscape, everything within your field of vision, sends continuous signals about what deserves attention. Every object in view subtly competes for cognitive resources, which explains why minimalist spaces often enhance concentration, while cluttered environments fragment it. Your auditory landscape shapes focus through both obvious and subtle means. While sudden noises clearly disrupt concentration, consistent background sounds can actually enhance it by masking irregular disruptions. The key lies not in absolute silence, but in auditory predictability. Your brain adapts more easily to steady ambient noise than to irregular interruptions. The proximity landscape, what lies within immediate reach, influences behavior through the principle of friction. Objects within arm's length create constant decision points about engagement. A phone within reach requires active resistance, while the same device placed in another room removes the need for conscious self-control. The transitional landscape encompasses the spaces you move through between focused work sessions. These transition zones often determine whether you maintain momentum or succumb to distraction. The path from your desk to the bathroom might take you past attention-grabbing triggers that break your flow state. Understanding these dimensions reveals the power of focus anchors, specific environmental elements that automatically shift your brain into deep work mode. These anchors might include particular lighting conditions, specific background sounds, or even physical objects that your brain associated with concentrated work. When properly designed, these environmental cues trigger focus without requiring conscious effort. The impact of environmental design becomes particularly clear through contrast. The same task that requires immense willpower in a poorly designed space flows naturally in an environment optimized for focus. This isn't about creating perfect conditions. It's about understanding how your surroundings either support or undermine your cognitive goals. Modern research in behavioral psychology and neuroscience confirms what many have intuited. Environment shapes behavior more reliably than intention. Your brain responds to surroundings in predictable ways, regardless of your conscious desires. This means environmental design offers a more reliable path to consistent focus than willpower alone. While ideal environmental conditions rarely exist in real-world settings, understanding these principles allows for strategic adaptation within constraints. Even small adjustments to visual fields, sound management, or object placement can significantly impact focus. The goal isn't perfection, but optimization within available parameters. The relationship between environmental variety and cognitive performance follows predictable patterns. While changing environments can stimulate creativity during certain types of work, maintaining consistent conditions often better serves deep focus. Understanding this distinction helps in designing spaces that match specific cognitive requirements. Environmental signals operate at both conscious and unconscious levels, creating complex feedback loops between your surroundings and mental state. Your brain constantly monitors these signals, adjusting attention and energy allocation accordingly. This automatic processing explains why environmental design proves so much more effective than relying on conscious control alone. The real power of environmental design lies in its passive nature. Unlike techniques requiring constant conscious effort, a well-designed environment works silently in the background, automatically supporting your focus goals. This represents a fundamental shift from trying to force attention through willpower to allowing it to flow naturally within optimized spaces. Chapter 4. The Dual Mind. You sit down to complete an important task, your determination strong, yet within moments find yourself caught in an exhausting internal battle. One part of your mind maintains laser focus on the goal ahead, while another part persistently pulls toward more immediate gratifications, checking messages, browsing the internet, or tackling easier but less important work. This mental tug-of-war leaves you drained without meaningful progress, creating a familiar cycle of frustration and self-doubt. This internal conflict isn't a character flaw or lack of discipline. It's the natural result of how your brain evolved to process information and respond to challenges. Your mind operates through two distinct but interconnected systems, the planner mind and the doing mind. The planner mind excels at analysis, strategy, and future projection. It's the part that sets goals, creates schedules, and envisions desired outcomes. The doing mind, conversely, operates in the present moment, responding intuitively to immediate circumstances and executing actions without conscious deliberation. These systems evolve for different yet complementary purposes. The planner mind developed to help our ancestors anticipate future needs, strategize for survival, and learn from past experiences. The doing mind evolved for immediate action, hunting, gathering, responding to threats, where overthinking could prove fatal. While both systems were essential for survival, they operate according to different rules and often work at cross purposes in our modern environment. Traditional productivity advice typically fails because it addresses the wrong system at the wrong time. Most approaches engage the planner mind during execution phases when the doing mind should be dominant. This creates a form of mental interference that makes tasks feel harder than necessary. When you're constantly analyzing and evaluating your progress during execution, you interrupt the natural flow state that the doing mind requires for optimal performance. The planner mind excels at strategy, but creates paralysis when overactive during implementation. Its tendency to consider multiple scenarios, evaluate risks, and optimize outcomes, invaluable during planning stages, becomes counterproductive when you need to take action. This explains why you might spend hours perfecting a plan only to feel stuck when it's time to begin. The doing mind excels at implementation but creates aimlessness when not properly directed. It responds to immediate cues and operates through established patterns, making it highly efficient for execution, but potentially directionless without clear guidance from the planner mind. This explains why you might find yourself busy with low-priority tasks while important projects remain untouched. What appears as procrastination or lack of focus often stems from improper synchronization between these systems. When the planner mind attempts to maintain control during execution phases, it creates resistance that manifests as distraction or delay. When the doing mind lacks clear direction from the planner mind, it defaults to whatever captures immediate attention, rather than what serves long-term goals. Understanding this dual system framework transforms how you approach productivity challenges. Rather than fighting against your mind's natural tendencies, you can learn to recognize which system is currently active and create appropriate conditions for each to operate effectively. This means establishing clear boundaries between planning and execution phases, and developing proper handoffs between systems that respect their distinct natures. Many productivity struggles stem from characteristic patterns of imbalance. Overplanners get caught in endless optimization, allowing the planner mind to dominate beyond its useful phase. They create perfect strategies but struggle with implementation because they never fully engage the doing mind. Conversely, impulsive doers leap into action without adequate direction, allowing the doing mind to operate without strategic guidance from the planner mind. This creates busy activity that often fails to align with important goals. The internal friction you experience between planning and doing isn't a flaw to eliminate, but a signal to interpret. This very tension, when properly understood, becomes a source of enhanced productivity rather than limitation. It indicates the need to transition between systems rather than trying to force them to operate simultaneously. The key to sustainable productivity lies not in strengthening either system, but in improving their coordination. This means learning to recognize the appropriate time for each mode and developing clean transitions between them. When you align with rather than fight against your brain's natural operating patterns, remarkable focus emerges without exhausting effort. Your mind already knows how to shift between planning and doing. You demonstrate this fluidity countless times throughout your day without conscious thought. The challenge isn't teaching your brain new tricks, but becoming aware of its existing rhythms and working in harmony with them. By honoring these natural cycles rather than imposing artificial constraints, you transform what was once a draining battle into an energizing dance between reflection and action. Chapter 5. The Motivation Mirage. You stare at your screen knowing exactly what needs to be done, yet find yourself organizing files, checking emails, or rearranging your desk, anything but starting the actual work. The voice in your head promises you'll begin as soon as you feel ready or get that spark of motivation that makes everything flow effortlessly. Hours pass, and the spark never comes. This pattern repeats day after day, creating a cycle of delay that leaves you frustrated and questioning your commitment. This common experience reveals a fundamental misunderstanding about how motivation actually works in your brain. The conventional belief that you need to feel motivated before taking action is precisely backward. A mental model that creates an impossible condition and guarantees procrastination. This insight isn't merely theoretical. It's grounded in the neurochemistry of motivation itself. Your brain produces dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with drive and enthusiasm, primarily in response to action rather than in anticipation of it. This biological reality means waiting to feel motivated before starting is like waiting to feel wet before entering water, a logical impossibility that keeps you perpetually stuck on the edge of action. This misunderstanding creates an especially dangerous trap for highly ambitious individuals. When you experience occasional periods of intense motivation, those wonderful moments when work flows effortlessly and progress seems automatic, you likely attribute these states to personal virtue or proper preparation. This attribution error leads you to believe you can recreate these optimal states through better planning or stronger commitment. However, these periods of high motivation are temporary neurochemical states that naturally fluctuate, not permanent conditions you can maintain through willpower. Understanding this reality liberates you from the exhausting attempt to force yourself into an inspired state before beginning work. The revolutionary truth is that the sequence in your brain runs opposite to conventional wisdom. Action precedes motivation, not the other way around. Small movements, even minimal steps toward your goal, trigger the very neurochemical cascade you've been waiting to feel before starting. This isn't positive thinking or self-help rhetoric. It's how your nervous system actually functions. This insight transforms procrastination from a mysterious enemy into a clear signal. When you're waiting for motivation, you're operating under a flawed model of how your brain creates drive and enthusiasm. The solution isn't to wait more patiently or prepare more thoroughly. It's to reverse the sequence entirely. This reversal particularly impacts creative work, where the myth of inspiration holds special power. Many believe creative tasks uniquely require an inspired state before beginning. While different types of work certainly benefit from different mental states, the fundamental initiation sequence remains consistent. Small actions create the conditions for inspiration, rather than the reverse. The difficulty you feel when starting without emotional drive is entirely real and valid. Your brain naturally resists engaging with challenging tasks when easier options are available. This resistance isn't a character flaw, but an energy conservation mechanism that served our ancestors well. However, understanding that motivation follows action allows you to work with this mechanism rather than being paralyzed by it. This perspective shift transforms how you approach any significant task. Instead of waiting for the right feeling, you recognize that the feeling emerges from movement itself. This doesn't make starting effortless, but it makes it possible in any emotional state. The key lies not in generating enthusiasm, but in initiating motion despite its absence. What appears as procrastination often masks a deeper wisdom, your recognition that waiting for motivation is ultimately futile. When you feel stuck, unable to begin despite knowing exactly what needs doing, you're experiencing the natural consequence of a backward model of motivation. This very stuckness contains valuable information about how your brain actually works. Information that, once properly understood, transforms your relationship with beginning difficult tasks. Every moment spent waiting for inspiration or the right feeling reinforces the very pattern that keeps you stuck. The path forward isn't through better preparation or stronger willpower, but through understanding and working with your brain's natural motivational sequence. This alignment with your neurochemistry, rather than resistance to it, creates the conditions for sustainable productivity without exhausting battles against your own nature. When you stop fighting against your brain's inherent patterns and instead learn to work within them, you discover an effortless flow that makes action natural rather than forced. Your resistance isn't a character flaw to overcome. It's valuable feedback about how your mind naturally operates. By accepting this reality rather than struggling against it, you open yourself to a fundamentally different relationship with motivation, one built on cooperation rather than conquest. Chapter 6. The Resistance Decoder. You sit at your desk, cursor blinking on the screen, as waves of self-criticism wash over you. Another day where that important project remains untouched. Society has taught you to interpret this resistance as a character flaw, evidence of laziness, lack of discipline, or insufficient willpower. This interpretation leads to a vicious cycle. The more you berate yourself for procrastinating, the heavier the emotional weight becomes, making action even more difficult. But this common narrative fundamentally misunderstands the nature and purpose of procrastination. What if your resistance isn't a weakness to be conquered, but valuable feedback from your subconscious? What if procrastination, rather than being a uniform phenomenon requiring more discipline, actually represents distinct patterns of resistance, each containing specific wisdom about what your project or process needs? When we examine procrastination through this lens, 4 distinct patterns emerge, each carrying different messages requiring different responses. Clarity resistance manifests when your next action isn't precisely defined. Your mind instinctively avoids tasks with ambiguous next steps, not out of laziness, but because unclear actions trigger your brain's threat detection systems. This form of procrastination often signals the need for greater definitional clarity before action becomes possible. Alignment resistance occurs when a task conflicts with deeper values or priorities, even if you haven't consciously acknowledged this misalignment. Your subconscious mind recognizes these conflicts before your conscious mind catches up. What feels like procrastination may actually be your inner wisdom, protecting you from investing energy in directions that don't serve your true objectives. Timing resistance emerges when the sequencing of your actions isn't optimal. Your brain possesses sophisticated pattern recognition capabilities that often detect when prerequisites aren't in place or when the current moment isn't ideal for a particular task. Rather than forcing action against this resistance, investigating the timing concerns often reveals legitimate obstacles that need addressing. Preparation resistance signals when crucial groundwork hasn't been laid. This form of procrastination often protects you from starting projects without necessary resources, information, or support structures in place. The discomfort you feel isn't laziness, but your mind's recognition that important prerequisites are missing. Understanding these distinct patterns transforms how you respond to procrastination. Instead of applying universal solutions like just start or break it down into smaller steps, you can investigate which type of resistance you're experiencing and respond appropriately. This shift from shame to curiosity, from force to investigation, often resolves procrastination more effectively than any amount of willpower. Your brain's resistance patterns operate like sophisticated early warning systems, detecting potential problems your conscious mind may have missed. When you experience clarity resistance, your subconscious may be protecting you from wasting energy on poorly defined actions. When alignment resistance appears, it might be highlighting important conflicts that need resolution. Timing resistance often reveals crucial sequencing issues, while preparation resistance can prevent premature starts that lead to frustration. This new understanding doesn't mean accepting all procrastination as valid or using these insights as excuses for inaction. Rather, it provides a framework for distinguishing between productive and unproductive delays. Productive resistance contains specific wisdom about what needs to change in your approach. Unproductive resistance represents habitual avoidance patterns that require different interventions. The key lies in learning to decode these signals rather than overriding them. When you feel resistance toward a task, pause to investigate which pattern you're experiencing. Is the next action crystal clear, or is ambiguity creating natural avoidance? Does the task align with your true priorities, or is there an unacknowledged value conflict? Is this the optimal sequence for this work, or are you trying to force action at the wrong time? Have you established all necessary prerequisites, or are you attempting to build without a foundation? This investigative approach transforms procrastination from enemy to ally. Rather than fighting against your resistance, you learn to extract its wisdom. The very delays that once sparked shame become valuable feedback mechanisms for improving both your process and outcomes. Looking at your blinking cursor now, consider that your resistance might contain precisely the information you need to move forward effectively. Instead of forcing action through willpower alone, what wisdom might your procrastination be trying to share? Chapter 7. The Focus Triggers Framework. Those rare, perfect days of productivity haunt you. Everything flows effortlessly, distractions fade away, and you accomplish more in a few hours than you typically manage in a week. These experiences prove what's possible. Yet their apparent randomness creates frustration. You can't rely on chance alignments when consistent focus is essential for your most important work. The truth is, these optimal states aren't accidents. They emerge when specific conditions align to trigger your brain's natural focusing mechanisms. Understanding these triggers transforms sporadic success into systematic achievement. Instead of forcing focus through exhausting willpower, you can engineer your environment and routines to automatically initiate and sustain attention. The Focus Triggers framework reveals how 4 interconnected domains work together to create these conditions. Environmental triggers encompass both physical and digital elements that signal your brain to engage deeply. The height of your desk, the lighting in your space, the arrangement of your tools, and the notifications on your devices all send constant messages to your nervous system about whether to focus or scatter attention. Temporal triggers harness the brain's natural tendency to associate specific times with specific mental states. Your mind responds differently to morning versus evening hours, to the start of a week versus its end, to the rhythms of your daily schedule. When you align your most important work with your peak biological times while creating clear transitions between different modes of attention, focus becomes dramatically easier to achieve and maintain. Physiological triggers leverage your body's role in determining mental states. Your posture, breathing patterns, energy levels, and physical comfort fundamentally shape your capacity for sustained attention. Understanding these connections allows you to deliberately create bodily conditions that support rather than undermine focus. Psychological triggers tap into the power of mental priming and state setting. The questions you ask yourself, the language you use to frame tasks, the goals you hold in mind, and the metrics you track all influence whether your mind engages or resists focused work. When properly designed, these psychological cues bypass conscious resistance to activate deep engagement. The real power emerges when these triggers work together as an integrated system. An optimal focus trigger chain might begin with a specific time of day, temporal, flowing into a dedicated workspace, environmental, supported by an energized physical state, physiological, and anchored by clear success criteria, psychological. Each trigger reinforces the others, creating a powerful momentum towards sustained attention. Research in behavioral psychology and habit formation reveals why isolated productivity techniques often fail while integrated trigger systems succeed. Your brain constantly seeks patterns and associations, automatically linking certain conditions with certain mental states. When you deliberately design these associations rather than letting them form by chance, you transform focus from a daily battle into your default state. This systematic approach explains why the most consistently productive individuals aren't necessarily those with superior willpower. Instead, they've developed sophisticated trigger systems that activate focus automatically, preserving mental energy for the work itself rather than the struggle to begin. They don't rely on motivation or discipline, but on carefully engineered conditions that make focus natural and distraction difficult. The initial investment in establishing these systems may seem substantial, but it pales in comparison to the ongoing mental friction of forcing focus through willpower alone. Every trigger you implement reduces the cognitive burden of getting started, creating compound returns on your productivity over time. Like a well-designed machine, a proper trigger system continues working efficiently long after the initial setup effort. Your existing environment and routines already contain focus triggers. They're just likely triggering distraction rather than concentration. The constant ping of notifications, the visibility of unfinished tasks, the ambiguity of workspace boundaries all trigger scattered attention by default. Understanding these mechanisms allows you to redesign them intentionally, transforming your surroundings from focus destroyers into focus enhancers. Success with trigger systems doesn't require dramatic lifestyle changes or perfect conditions. Small, strategic adjustments compound over time to create significant shifts in your default attention patterns. Each trigger you implement builds upon the others, gradually transforming your relationship with focused work from constant struggle to natural flow. When you look closely at your own peak productivity days, you'll likely discover specific trigger combinations that created those states, even if you weren't consciously aware of them at the time. The key lies in identifying these effective triggers and systematically recreating them rather than hoping they'll align by chance. Chapter 8. The Completion Threshold. The weight of incomplete projects creates a uniquely draining form of psychological burden. Each unfinished task consumes mental energy whether you're actively working on it or not, like background processes running on your computer that slowly drain its battery. While traditional productivity advice focuses on starting more efficiently or pushing harder toward completion, these approaches miss the fundamental psychology of how incomplete work affects your brain. Research has revealed a fascinating phenomenon called the Zeigarnik effect, which demonstrates that unfinished tasks consume significantly more cognitive resources than completed ones. Your mind maintains an active representation of any incomplete work, dedicating precious mental bandwidth to periodically checking its status and maintaining relevant details in accessible memory. This creates a psychological tax that compounds with each additional incomplete project. The breakthrough concept of the completion threshold explains why some projects naturally build momentum, while others stagnate indefinitely. This threshold represents the critical tipping point where a project shifts from being energy draining to energy generating. Before crossing this threshold, every engagement with the work requires willpower and conscious effort. After crossing it, the project begins creating its own momentum, pulling you toward completion rather than requiring you to push. Understanding this threshold reveals why most productivity systems inadvertently perpetuate rather than solve the problem of incomplete work. By focusing on efficient task management without accounting for psychological completion points, these systems often create project structures that maximize cognitive load while minimizing the mental relief of genuine completion. Three key dimensions determine a project's psychological weight and influence how easily it crosses the completion threshold. Visibility refers to how frequently the incomplete work enters your awareness. Projects with high visibility consume more mental resources even when you're not actively working on them. Size encompasses not just the scope of work, but the number of distinct components requiring separate tracking and decision-making. Clarity represents how definitively you'll know when the project is complete. Ambiguous endpoints create persistent cognitive drag by preventing psychological closure. The transformative insight is that restructuring projects to consistently cross the completion threshold eliminates the primary source of procrastination and mental exhaustion. Rather than relying on increased discipline or longer work hours, this approach aligns with your brain's natural tendencies toward closure and completion. Projects must be sized appropriately to cross this threshold regularly. Too large, and they remain perpetually incomplete, draining energy without providing the psychological reward of completion. Too small, and they create administrative overhead without meaningful progress. The optimal size varies by individual and project type, but the key principle remains. Structure work to cross the completion threshold frequently enough to maintain momentum. This requires establishing strategic staging points, clear milestones that provide genuine psychological completion while maintaining project coherence. These aren't arbitrary progress markers, but carefully designed completion points that allow your brain to release its hold on that portion of the work. The goal is to create a series of meaningful completions that build upon each other rather than fragmenting the work into artificially small tasks. For creative projects, these staging points might align with natural breaks in the creative process, moving from research to outline, outline to rough draft to refined version. Analytical work often benefits from staging points that separate data gathering, analysis, and recommendation phases. Management projects can be structured around key decision points or deliverables that create clear boundaries between phases. The completion threshold fundamentally alters your relationship with work by transforming how projects consume and generate energy. When properly structured, each completion creates momentum that carries forward into the next phase, establishing a sustainable rhythm of progress rather than the starts and stops that characterize most work patterns. This approach validates the very real challenge of managing multiple ongoing projects while providing a clear path toward reducing their psychological burden. Instead of fighting against your brain's natural resistance to incompletion, you can work with its innate drive toward closure and completion. The next chapter builds on this foundation by examining how decision minimization preserves the mental energy needed to consistently cross completion thresholds, creating a sustainable system for maintaining momentum across all your important work. Chapter 9. The Decision Minimizer. You feel the familiar weight of mental exhaustion settling in by mid-afternoon, yet a quick review of your accomplishments reveals little meaningful progress. Your mental energy has been consumed not by deep work or creative breakthroughs, but by the countless small decisions peppered throughout your day. This pattern reveals a crucial insight about productivity that most fail to recognize. Your brain's decision-making capacity and your ability to focus draw from the same limited cognitive resource pool. The neuroscience of decision-making reveals why even seemingly trivial choices drain the same mental energy required for important creative and analytical work. When you deliberate over what to wear, which email to answer first, or what to eat for lunch, your brain activates its executive function networks, the same neural circuits needed for deep focus and complex problem solving. This biological reality means every decision, regardless of apparent importance, depletes your finite daily capacity for concentrated thought. This insight transforms our understanding of productivity. Traditional approaches emphasize better decision-making through enhanced willpower and discipline. However, this strategy fundamentally misunderstands the nature of mental energy. Superior results come not from making better decisions, but from making fewer decisions overall, by creating systems that eliminate unnecessary choice points entirely. Consider how decision points fragment your attention across four distinct categories. Routine decisions represent recurring choices that could be standardized, like when to exercise or what to eat for breakfast. Low-value decisions consume mental energy disproportionate to their impact, such as constantly choosing which small task to tackle next. Premature decisions waste cognitive resources by forcing choices before necessary information is available. Reactive decisions hijack your attention by demanding responses to external triggers rather than internal priorities. Each category creates its own form of cognitive drain, but together they form a perfect storm that depletes mental energy needed for meaningful work. This depletion happens below conscious awareness. You don't actively feel each decision taxing your mental resources, but their cumulative effect manifests as difficulty concentrating, reduced willpower, and compromised judgment as the day progresses. The most productive individuals understand this dynamic and structure their lives to minimize decision points rather than attempting to power through them with pure willpower. They recognize that mental energy preservation through systematic decision elimination produces consistently superior results while requiring less effort. This insight becomes transformative when you begin identifying and eliminating hidden decision points in your own work and life. Each unnecessary choice you remove frees up mental energy that can be redirected toward meaningful creation and problem solving. The goal isn't to eliminate all decisions. Certain choices deserve your full attention and actually benefit from enhanced mental resources. Rather, the objective is to eliminate low-value decisions that currently steal energy from what matters most. Those who master this approach experience a profound shift in their daily experience of work. Tasks that once felt depleting become energizing because more mental resources are available for deep engagement. Complex problems become easier to solve because your brain isn't exhausted from hundreds of minor decisions. Most importantly, you find yourself able to maintain focused states for longer periods because you're no longer constantly depleting your cognitive resources through unnecessary choices. The key lies in recognizing that mental energy is your most precious productive resource. Every decision you eliminate through systematization or automation preserves this resource for important work. This isn't about becoming more disciplined or developing better decision-making skills. It's about creating an environment and workflow that requires fewer decisions in the first place. The cumulative impact of decision minimization extends far beyond productivity. When you reduce the cognitive burden of constant choice, you experience greater mental clarity, enhanced creativity, and improved decision-making on truly important matters. You move through your day with more ease and purpose, knowing your mental energy is being preserved for what matters most. This relationship between decision frequency and mental energy holds the key to sustainable productivity. By systematically identifying and eliminating unnecessary choice points, you create the conditions for naturally enhanced focus without relying on willpower or discipline. Your path to greater accomplishment doesn't require becoming someone different. It requires designing your environment and systems to better serve who you already are. When you remove the friction of constant decision-making, your natural capabilities emerge unhindered. The energy previously consumed by endless small choices becomes available for deep work and meaningful progress. This isn't about forcing yourself into rigid systems, but rather about creating spaces where your innate drive to accomplish naturally flourishes. Your productivity soars not because you've changed your essence, but because you finally cleared the path for your authentic self to thrive. Chapter 10. The Momentum Principle. You sit before the blank screen, cursor blinking accusingly. The task ahead looms like a mountain, its peak obscured by clouds of uncertainty and doubt. Despite knowing exactly what needs to be done, your mind and body resist taking that first step. This paralysis isn't unique to you. It's a universal human experience rooted in the fundamental nature of how our brains process the initiation of challenging tasks. What you're experiencing is the psychological equivalent of physical inertia. Just as a stationary object requires significant force to begin moving, but relatively little to maintain motion, your brain demands disproportionate energy to start meaningful work compared to continuing it once begun. This phenomenon, which we call the momentum principle, explains why the anticipation of work consistently feels more daunting than the actual doing. Your brain's resistance to starting isn't a character flaw or lack of discipline. It's a sophisticated energy conservation mechanism developed over millions of years of evolution. From your brain's perspective, maintaining your current state is always safer and more efficient than venturing into unknown territory that might require significant resources. This biological reality means that trying to force yourself to start through sheer willpower is like trying to overcome gravity through determination alone. You're fighting against fundamental forces rather than working with them. Understanding this dynamic transforms how we approach difficult beginnings. Traditional productivity advice suggesting you just start or push through resistance fails because it requires too much initial activation energy. It's like trying to start a car by pushing it up to speed. Theoretically possible, but practically exhausting and unsustainable. The key insight lies in understanding how your brain's reward circuitry processes initiated versus non-initiated tasks. Once you begin meaningful work, your neural chemistry shifts dramatically. Dopamine and other neurochemicals that create feelings of engagement and satisfaction begin flowing naturally. But these chemicals only activate after movement begins. They can't be accessed through planning or preparation alone. This biological reality points to a revolutionary approach. Instead of trying to generate enough emotional or mental energy to match the task's perceived magnitude, focus on creating microscopic movements so small they slip beneath your brain's resistance threshold. These micro-movements aren't about tricking yourself into action. They're about working with your brain's natural tendencies rather than against them. Each micro movement creates a tiny ripple of momentum that, when properly sequenced, builds into a current strong enough to carry you naturally into states of deep engagement. The key lies in making these initial actions so minimal that they require virtually no emotional or mental resources to begin. For analytical tasks, a micro movement might be opening the relevant document and changing its font size. For creative work, it could be writing a deliberately terrible first sentence with the explicit intention of deleting it. For administrative tasks, it might be simply moving all required materials into your immediate visual field. The crucial element isn't the specific action, but its scale. It must be small enough to feel trivial yet directly related to the larger task. This creates a psychological bridge between inaction and action while bypassing the brain's threat detection systems that typically trigger resistance. What makes this approach so powerful is its alignment with fundamental principles of behavioral psychology. You're not fighting against your brain's natural tendencies or trying to generate motivation artificially. Instead, you're creating conditions where momentum develops organically through properly sequenced physical actions. This explains why the same task can feel impossible when viewed as a whole, but manageable when broken down into micro movements. Your brain processes large, abstract challenges as potential threats requiring significant resources. But small, concrete actions register as low-risk opportunities for easy rewards, activating approach motivation rather than avoidance. The resistance you feel towards starting important work isn't weakness. It's your brain performing exactly as designed to conserve resources and protect you from potential threats. By understanding this mechanism, you can work with this protective instinct rather than fighting against it, transforming the experience of beginning from an exhausting battle into a strategic process. Your brain's resistance actually demonstrates remarkable intelligence, carefully evaluating each situation to maintain your survival and success. When you feel that familiar hesitation before tackling a significant task, you're experiencing an ancient wisdom that has kept humans safe and thriving for millennia. The key isn't to silence this protective response, but to channel it productively, using its energy to fuel careful preparation rather than paralysis. This shift in perspective transforms resistance from an obstacle into a valuable ally in your journey toward meaningful accomplishment. Chapter 11. The Transition Mastery. You face an invisible productivity drain that silently consumes your mental energy and focus throughout each day. While you've likely invested significant effort in optimizing individual tasks, the critical moments between those tasks often create more friction and waste than the activities themselves. These transition points represent vulnerable junctures where your carefully cultivated focus can either maintain momentum or dissipate entirely. The challenge lies in understanding how your brain processes these shifts between different types of work. Neuroscience reveals that context switching demands significant cognitive resources as your neural networks reconfigure for different types of thinking. This reconfiguration isn't instantaneous. It creates what researchers call attention residue, where thoughts and emotional engagement from previous tasks continue occupying mental bandwidth even as you attempt to focus on new work. This residue effect compounds throughout your day. Each transition without proper closure accumulates mental static that interferes with subsequent focus. Your brain, designed for efficiency, attempts to maintain multiple open loops simultaneously rather than fully shifting attention. While this might seem adaptive, it actually creates a mounting cognitive burden that manifests as mental fatigue and diminished concentration. The solution emerges from understanding transitions across three fundamental dimensions: Cognitive transitions involve the mental processes of properly closing one task and opening another. This requires more than simply stopping one activity and starting another. It demands deliberate closure that allows your brain to fully release its engagement with previous work. Environmental transitions encompass how you move between different physical and digital spaces. Your brain forms strong associations between environments and types of thinking, making these shifts particularly demanding when not properly managed. The key lies in creating distinct contextual boundaries that signal different modes of work to your nervous system. Energetic transitions address how you manage your psychological and physiological resources between activities. Different types of work demand different energy signatures. Creative work might require expansive thinking, while analytical tasks need precise focus. Shifting between these modes without proper bridging protocols often results in energy misalignment that undermines performance. This understanding reveals why traditional productivity systems often fall short. They typically focus on optimizing individual tasks while ignoring the crucial bridges between them. It's like building efficient factories connected by treacherous mountain paths. The overall system can only operate as effectively as its weakest links. The transformative insight comes from recognizing that transitions don't have to represent complete resets. Properly designed bridges between tasks can preserve mental momentum while redirecting it toward new objectives. This shift in perspective transforms transitions from productivity obstacles into opportunities for enhanced focus and energy management. When moving from creative to analytical work, your brain requires different neural networks and thinking patterns. Without proper transition protocols, this shift can create mental friction that wastes energy and fragments attention. However, brief bridging activities that gradually narrow focus from divergent to convergent thinking can make these transitions nearly seamless. Similarly, shifting between deep individual work and collaborative engagement demands careful attention to social and cognitive energy management. Proper transition design here involves not just changing tasks, but consciously adjusting your social aperture to maintain effectiveness in different interpersonal contexts. The most challenging transitions often involve moving between high-energy tasks, requiring broad attention and precision work demanding narrow focus. These shifts benefit from specific physiological reset protocols that help your nervous system calibration for different types of mental demands. Even the crucial transition from work to personal life requires deliberate design to prevent professional concerns from consuming evening attention. Proper closure of work-related thoughts through structured shutdown routines proves essential for true mental recovery and next-day focus. The meta-principle underlying effective transitions is that your brain craves clear signals about what type of thinking and energy expenditure will be required next. By providing these signals through consistent transition protocols, you reduce the cognitive overhead of context switching while maintaining momentum between different types of work. Your current transition patterns likely evolved accidentally rather than through conscious design. This explains why you might find yourself mindlessly checking social media between tasks, or feeling mentally scattered after switching activities. These habits represent your brain's attempt to create its own transitions in the absence of intentional protocols. Without clear boundaries between different modes of thinking, your mind grasps for familiar distractions as makeshift transition signals. Each notification check and social media scroll serves as an unconscious attempt to reset your mental state. But these fragmented moments of distraction often leave you more scattered than when you began. The very mechanisms meant to give your brain a break instead create additional cognitive burden, like trying to clear mental fog by adding more haze. Chapter 12: The Deep Rhythm. Throughout the day, your focus and mental capacity follow predictable yet largely ignored patterns. You've experienced this phenomenon, those mysterious periods when complex work flows effortlessly, contrasted with times when even simple tasks feel impossibly challenging. This variation isn't random, nor does it reflect your level of commitment or discipline. It represents your brain's natural ultradian rhythm, a fundamental biological cycle that powerfully influences cognitive function. Modern workday structures, inherited from industrial-age factories designed for consistent mechanical output, fundamentally conflict with these natural cognitive patterns. Your brain operates in 90 to 120-minute cycles of peak capacity, followed by necessary recovery periods. Fighting against these rhythms through sheer willpower depletes precious mental resources while delivering suboptimal results. The science behind these patterns reveals why traditional time management approaches often fail. When you force analytical work during a creativity-optimized phase, or attempt detailed tasks during big-picture thinking periods, you're essentially swimming upstream against your brain's natural current. This misalignment creates the exhausting sensation of pushing against invisible resistance. Neuroscience research demonstrates that cognitive capacity isn't static throughout the day, but follows predictable waves of high and low function. These waves affect different types of thinking, creative insight, analytical processing, communication ability, and detail orientation in distinct patterns. Understanding this variation explains why the same task might feel effortless at 10 a.m. but nearly impossible at 2 p.m., regardless of how important you consider it. Your unique cognitive chronotype determines the specific timing of these cycles. Some people experience their sharpest analytical thinking early in the morning, while others find their creative peak in late evening hours. This isn't preference but biology. Attempting to override these patterns through discipline alone is as futile as trying to change your height through determination. The counterintuitive truth is that timing matters more than technique. When you attempt certain types of work profoundly influences how much mental energy that work requires. A complex analysis that demands 2 hours of grueling focus during your cognitive trough might flow naturally in 40 minutes during your peak period. This principle explains why some days seem to generate exceptional output, with minimal strain, while others yield little despite constant effort. Mapping your personal energy patterns reveals these optimal windows for different types of thinking. This process involves tracking your natural rises and dips in specific cognitive capacities, marking when complex problems seem to solve themselves, when communication flows effortlessly, or when detailed work feels most natural. These observations uncover your unique chronotype and cognitive rhythm. The most sustainable approach works with these patterns rather than against them. This means scheduling your most important analytical work during peak cognitive hours, reserving administrative tasks for periods of lower mental capacity, and honoring the necessary recovery phases that maintain this cycle. Strategic breaks become productivity tools rather than productivity losses. The pulse and pause approach aligns your workload with these natural rhythms. Instead of forcing continuous output, this method involves focusing intensely during peak periods, then deliberately disengaging during natural dips. This pattern maximizes cognitive resources while minimizing the accumulation of mental fatigue. Energy-based task batching further optimizes this alignment by grouping similar types of work according to your daily cognitive patterns. This reduces the costly context switching that occurs when jumping between different modes of thinking, while ensuring each type of work receives your best mental resources for that particular cognitive mode. For those facing externally imposed schedules or unpredictable demands, Understanding these patterns becomes even more crucial. While you may not have complete control over when certain tasks must occur, you can structure your remaining time to support rather than fight against your natural rhythms. This might mean front-loading your most challenging work during your peak windows, or using recovery periods strategically throughout the day. Even within rigid schedules, small adjustments in how you sequence tasks can dramatically impact your effectiveness. By reserving your sharpest hours for deep work and channeling periods of lower energy into administrative duties, you transform apparent constraints into hidden advantages. The key lies not in achieving perfect control, but in making intelligent use of whatever flexibility you do have. Chapter 13. The Distraction. Vacuums. Your mind possesses an extraordinary ability to find escape routes, even in environments meticulously designed for focus. Despite blocking notifications, silencing devices, and creating the perfect workspace, you still find yourself inexplicably drawn to checking email, browsing social media, or engaging in any activity except the important work before you. This universal tendency towards self-distraction reveals a deeper truth about how your brain processes psychological discomfort. When you sit down to engage in focused work, your brain's vigilance systems activate, constantly scanning for potential threats. These threats aren't physical dangers, but psychological discomforts that trigger the same neural pathways. Understanding these discomfort signals transforms your relationship with distraction from a battle of willpower to a process of strategic prevention. Your attention responds to psychological vacuums created by 5 primary distraction drivers. Uncertainty creates the most powerful vacuum. When outcomes feel unclear or success criteria remain ambiguous, your brain perceives this ambiguity as a threat, automatically seeking escape through distraction. The difficulty vacuum activates when tasks push beyond your perceived capabilities, triggering an avoidance response that feels like an irresistible pull toward easier activities. Duration uncertainty, not knowing how long something will take or seeing no clear endpoint, creates another vacuum your mind desperately tries to escape. The meaning vacuum opens when purpose feels insufficient or disconnected from larger goals, while the reward vacuum activates when the payoff feels too distant or abstract. These vacuums don't reflect personal weakness. They represent your brain's default mode network functioning exactly as designed. This network, responsible for mind-wandering and self-referential thinking, automatically activates in response to perceived threats or discomfort. Traditional productivity advice focusing on willpower or discipline fails because it attempts to override these fundamental neural mechanisms rather than addressing their root causes. The key insight that transforms this pattern lies in understanding that distraction doesn't cause task abandonment. Task abandonment causes distraction. When your mind perceives psychological threat in a task, it actively seeks escape routes. The distraction itself isn't the problem, but rather a symptom of unaddressed psychological needs within the work structure. Closing these vacuums requires specific preventive measures for each type. Uncertainty vacuums close through precise success criteria and clear next actions. Difficulty vacuums require strategic scaffolding that bridges the gap between current capability and task demands. Duration vacuums resolve through temporal containers and clear endpoints. Meaning vacuums close by explicitly connecting immediate actions to larger purpose, while reward vacuums require carefully structured intermediate payoffs that maintain engagement. The distinction between productive discomfort and counterproductive strain proves crucial for sustainable focus. Productive discomfort, The sensation of pushing beyond current capabilities promotes growth when properly supported. Counterproductive strain, the overwhelming feeling of facing impossible demands, triggers protective avoidance responses that fragment attention. Learning to distinguish between these experiences allows you to maintain challenge while eliminating unnecessary psychological friction. Your tendency towards self-distraction contains hidden wisdom when properly understood. These patterns don't reflect character flaws, but rather protective mechanisms highlighting specific needs requiring attention. When you experience the urge to abandon focus, your mind is sending valuable signals about what's missing from your task structure. The liberation in this understanding comes from recognizing that focused attention emerges naturally when psychological needs are met. Rather than fighting against your brain's protective responses, you can work with them by designing work environments and processes that proactively address these core needs. The goal shifts from forcing focus through willpower to creating conditions where focus becomes the path of least resistance. Clarity stands as the foundation for addressing these psychological drivers of distraction. Without precise thinking about outcomes, processes, and success criteria, uncertainty vacuums inevitably open. Your mind, seeking safety and certainty, will naturally drift toward activities where the parameters feel more defined. This vital relationship between clarity and sustained attention leads us to explore exactly how precision thinking closes one of the most powerful distraction drivers. When you bring laser-sharp definition to your work, you eliminate the foggy spaces where doubt and hesitation breed. The simple act of getting specific about what you're creating, why it matters, and what success looks like can transform a task from an anxiety-producing void into an inviting space for focused engagement. Your mind gravitates towards certainty, like a compass needle finding true north. By giving shape and substance to your objectives, you create a magnetic pull that naturally draws your attention where it needs to go. Those formerly intimidating projects become compelling invitations rather than overwhelming obligations, all through the clarifying power of precise thinking. This shift doesn't require Herculean effort or ironclad willpower. It flows naturally from bringing definition to the undefined. Chapter 14. The Clarity Engine. You stare at your to-do list, confronting yet another vague task that creates immediate resistance. Despite having carved out dedicated time and feeling relatively energized, something holds you back from beginning. This hesitation isn't laziness or lack of commitment. It's your brain's natural response to mental fuzziness. When your mind encounters imprecise thinking about work, it activates threat detection systems designed to protect you from potential dangers. This neurological response makes perfect sense from an evolutionary perspective. Ambiguity in our ancestral environment often signaled risk. Today, this same protective mechanism creates friction around unclear tasks, making procrastination nearly inevitable. The distinction between general and specific clarity proves crucial for understanding this dynamic. General clarity, knowing broadly what needs to be done, fails to bypass your brain's resistance mechanisms. Specific clarity, understanding precisely how to begin, what completion looks like, and the exact sequence of steps between, creates an almost magnetic pull toward action by eliminating the cognitive load that triggers avoidance. 4 distinct dimensions of clarity directly impact your ability to initiate and sustain focused work. Action clarity addresses the specific physical movements required to begin, not just write report, but open document and type first sentence about project background. Outcome clarity defines the tangible result that signals completion, not just finish presentation, but create 12 slides with specific talking points and visual examples for each core concept. Process clarity outlines the sequence of steps between initiation and completion, not just research topic, but identify 3 primary sources, extract key quotes, synthesize main arguments. Purpose clarity connects the work to meaningful impact, not just update website, but enhance user experience to increase customer satisfaction and retention. The brain processes these different types of clarity through distinct neural pathways. When all 4 dimensions achieve precision, resistance dissolves naturally because your mind no longer perceives ambiguity as a threat requiring protective avoidance. This explains why simply trying harder to focus on vague tasks consistently fails. You're attempting to override fundamental neurological responses rather than eliminating their triggers. The Clarity Engine methodology provides a systematic framework for achieving this precision through targeted questioning. Instead of attempting to force focus on unclear work, you direct specific questions at each dimension of clarity until resistance dissolves naturally. This process transforms tasks from sources of procrastination into clearly defined opportunities for action. For action clarity, what is the exact physical movement that will initiate this work? What will my hands be doing in the first 30 seconds? For outcome clarity, what tangible result will signal completion? What specific elements must be present? How will I know without ambiguity that this task is finished? For process clarity, what is the complete sequence of steps between initiation and completion? What comes first, second, third? What resources are needed at each stage? For purpose clarity, how does completing this task create value? What specific impact will it have? Why does this particular work matter right now? These precision questions serve as cognitive tools that eliminate the mental fuzziness triggering procrastination. They work not by increasing motivation or discipline, but by removing the neurological friction that makes starting feel difficult in the first place. This approach fundamentally differs from traditional productivity advice that focuses on overcoming resistance through willpower. Instead of fighting against your brain's natural protective mechanisms, precision questions eliminate the conditions that activate these mechanisms. The result is not just reduced procrastination, but an almost automatic pull toward action once sufficient clarity exists. However, there's an important distinction between clarifying questions that facilitate action versus endless analysis that prevents it. The goal isn't perfect planning, but sufficient precision to bypass your brain's threat detection systems. This usually requires just enough clarity to create certainty about how to begin and what completion entails. This process might initially feel time-consuming compared to diving into work immediately. Yet this investment in front-end clarity consistently saves more time than it costs by eliminating the start-stop pattern of attempted work followed by distraction-seeking behavior. When precision exists across all 4 dimensions of clarity, focus becomes your natural state rather than something requiring constant effort to maintain. Your brain's resistance to vague tasks isn't a weakness to overcome but valuable feedback about insufficient clarity. By using precision questions to eliminate mental fuzziness, you transform procrastination from an enemy to be fought into a signal that guides you toward more effective thinking about work. Chapter 15. The Flow Gateway. Time dissolves. Self-consciousness evaporates. Your work flows with an effortless precision that feels almost supernatural. These rare moments of complete immersion represent your mind's ultimate capacity for focused achievement, what psychologists call flow states. Yet for most people, these experiences seem to arrive by chance rather than choice, leaving them frustrated when they need peak performance but can't access this optimal state. This elusive quality of flow creates a common misconception that it's a mysterious gift granted to a lucky few rather than a natural capacity we all possess. The truth is that flow follows predictable patterns. It emerges reliably when specific conditions are present and remains stubbornly absent when they're not. Understanding these conditions transforms flow from an occasional accident into a consistent capability. The neuroscience of flow reveals why this state creates maximum cognitive performance with minimum subjective effort. During flow, your brain experiences a dramatic shift in neural activity. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for self-monitoring and conscious control, becomes less active. Meanwhile, implicit learning networks light up, allowing for more fluid and intuitive processing. This reorganization of mental resources explains why flow feels effortless, yet produces exceptional results. Modern work environments and habits actively prevent flow states rather than encourage them. Constant digital notifications, fractured attention spans, and irregular challenge levels create conditions antithetical to deep immersion. The typical knowledge worker's day consists of constant context switching, unclear success metrics, and insufficient feedback loops, all of which make flow neurologically impossible. Research has identified 7 essential preconditions that must be present for flow to emerge. First, goals must be crystal clear. Not just the ultimate objective, but each intermediate milestone. Second, feedback must be immediate and unambiguous, allowing for continuous adjustment of performance. Third, the challenge level must precisely match your current skill level. Too easy breeds boredom. Too difficult triggers anxiety. The fourth condition requires the possibility of complete concentration. Even brief interruptions can prevent or break flow. Fifth, you need a clear sense of control over the process and outcome. Sixth, self-consciousness must temporarily fade, allowing complete absorption in the task. Finally, your perception of time must transform, typically experiencing hours as minutes. These conditions explain why flow occurs naturally in certain activities, but seems impossible in others. Athletes often access flow because sports provide clear goals, immediate feedback, and match challenge levels. Artists experience flow when their technical mastery meets creative challenges in an environment free from distraction. What appears as talent often reflects an intuitive ability to create these conditions. The key insight is that flow isn't random. It's engineered. By deliberately structuring your work environment and processes to meet these preconditions, you make flow accessible by design rather than by chance. This requires understanding your personal flow profile, the specific combinations of conditions that most reliably trigger your optimal state. Your flow profile depends on several factors: your cognitive strengths, emotional patterns, environmental preferences, and energy cycles. Some people access flow more easily through creative work, others through analytical challenges. Some require complete silence, others thrive with background music. Some find flow in the early morning, others late at night. The brain's natural tendency toward homeostasis means it resists dramatic state changes unless specific triggers are present. This explains why waiting for flow is futile. You must actively create the conditions that make it neurologically inevitable. When these conditions align, flow becomes your default state rather than an exception. This fundamentally changes how you approach important work. Instead of forcing yourself to focus through willpower, you engineer your environment and task structure to make focus automatic. Rather than fighting against your brain's natural tendencies, you align with them to access your peak capabilities consistently. The transformation in both experience and results can be dramatic. Tasks that normally feel draining become energizing. Work that typically requires constant effort flows naturally. Productivity increases while subjective effort decreases. Most importantly, you gain reliable access to your mind's most powerful and rewarding state. This holds profound implications for anyone seeking to perform at their highest level consistently. Flow isn't a mysterious gift, but a natural capacity waiting to be systematically unlocked. By understanding and implementing its preconditions, you transform peak performance from an occasional accident into a deliberate achievement. When you grasp this fundamental truth, everything shifts. Your relationship with challenging work, your approach to important projects, even your sense of what's possible. You begin to see that your peak states aren't random strokes of luck, but natural outcomes of deliberately created conditions. The barriers between your everyday self and your highest potential dissolve as you learn to bridge this gap through intelligent design rather than brute force. Chapter 16: The Motivation Formula. You've experienced those frustrating moments, staring at an important task that feels like pushing a boulder uphill while hours slip effortlessly away on social media or email. This stark contrast reveals a fundamental truth about human motivation. Some activities create natural magnetism, while others demand constant force. The difference lies not in the activities themselves, but in how they engage your brain's core motivational circuitry. When you understand the neuroscience of motivation, you discover that your brain is already perfectly designed for intense focus and sustained effort. The key is not forcing yourself to work harder, but creating conditions that align with your mind's natural tendencies. This explains why willpower-based approaches consistently fail. They fight against your brain's basic operating principles rather than working with them. The motivation formula reveals 4 essential elements that determine whether an activity creates pull or requires push. Purpose connection links your immediate actions to meaningful outcomes that matter deeply to you. Autonomy experience generates a sense of choice and self-direction rather than external control. Mastery progression provides clear evidence that your capabilities are expanding through engagement. Feedback presence creates tight coupling between your efforts and their results. Traditional productivity approaches often inadvertently suppress these elements. Rigid schedules undermine autonomy. Excessive focus on outcomes disconnects you from mastery progression. Delayed or unclear feedback breaks the crucial link between action and result. Most critically, mechanical execution without purpose drains meaning from otherwise important work. Different types of work naturally align with different motivational elements. Creative tasks thrive on autonomy and mastery. Analytical work demands clear feedback loops. Administrative tasks require strong purpose connection to overcome their inherent tedium. Collaborative projects need careful balancing of all elements to maintain engagement across different personalities and working styles. Understanding these patterns transforms how you approach previously resistant activities. Instead of trying to force yourself through pure discipline, you can deliberately engineer conditions that create natural pull. This shift fundamentally changes your relationship with important work. The brain's reward circuitry responds powerfully to properly structured challenges. When you align tasks with core motivational elements, the same work that once demanded constant pushing begins generating its own momentum. This creates a virtuous cycle where engagement breeds further engagement. Most productivity struggles stem from working against these natural principles rather than with them. External rewards undermine intrinsic motivation. Comparison with others disconnects you from personal mastery progression. Over-reliance on willpower depletes limited cognitive resources that could be better spent on actual work. The solution lies not in trying harder, but in strategic redesign. By analyzing your current motivational patterns, you can identify specific elements missing from resistant activities. This allows targeted adjustments that transform the experience of engagement. Consider how different the same task feels when properly aligned with motivational principles versus forced through willpower alone. Writing a report shifts from grinding obligation to engaging exploration when connected to meaningful impact. Data analysis becomes naturally absorbing rather than tedious when feedback loops are tightened. Administrative work flows more easily when linked to valued outcomes. This isn't about making work artificially fun or eliminating all difficulty. Productive struggle plays an essential role in growth and achievement. The key is ensuring that struggle serves a purpose and occurs within a framework that maintains engagement rather than depleting it. Your motivational capacity is not fixed. By understanding and deliberately engineering these core elements, you can create conditions where sustained focus and consistent action emerge naturally, rather than requiring constant force. The path to remarkable achievement lies not in pushing harder, but in designing better. The brain's reward systems respond to how activities are structured, not just their content. When you align important work with these foundational motivational elements, resistance diminishes while natural engagement grows. This creates sustainable momentum that carries you through inevitable fluctuations in immediate motivation. Chapter 17. The Accountability Architecture. You've experienced it countless times, starting a new project with boundless enthusiasm and determination, only to watch your initial momentum gradually fade until the work joins your growing collection of abandoned commitments. This pattern isn't a reflection of your character or capabilities, but rather reveals a fundamental misunderstanding about how sustainable progress actually works. The conventional wisdom suggests that strong enough motivation should be sufficient for follow-through. Yet research in behavioral psychology and neuroscience reveals why this assumption sets you up for failure. Your brain's motivation and reward systems naturally fluctuate based on numerous factors, including stress levels, energy state, competing priorities, and environmental conditions. These fluctuations aren't a bug in your mental software. They're a feature designed to help you adapt to changing circumstances and preserve resources when needed. Understanding this reality leads to a transformative insight. External accountability isn't a crutch for the weak-willed, but an essential component of any reliable system for sustained progress. Just as a bridge needs both internal structural integrity and external support systems to remain stable, your work requires both internal drive and external scaffolding to reach completion consistently. The Accountability Architecture framework reveals 4 critical dimensions that determine whether external structures support or undermine your progress. First, consequence structures must be carefully calibrated. Too weak and they fail to influence behavior. Too harsh and they trigger avoidance or rebellion. Effective consequences create mild but meaningful tension that makes follow-through feel easier than abandonment. Second, visibility mechanisms determine who sees your progress or lack thereof. Public commitments can be powerful motivators, but exposure must be strategically targeted. The right observers provide encouragement and support while maintaining healthy pressure. The wrong audience can trigger performance anxiety or shame that paralyzes progress. Third, progress architecture defines how completion is tracked and measured. Effective systems break work into clearly defined stages with specific metrics for success at each phase. This creates a sense of momentum through small wins, while ensuring you always know exactly where you stand relative to your goals. Fourth, recalibration systems determine how your accountability adapts when circumstances change. Rigid structures often crack under pressure, while overly flexible ones provide insufficient stability. The key is building in specific trigger points and processes for adjusting expectations without abandoning them entirely. When these dimensions align properly, accountability becomes a powerful ally rather than an opposing force. The right external structures don't constrain your autonomy. They enhance it by ensuring your aspirations translate into actual outcomes. They function like guardrails on a mountain road, providing security that allows you to move forward confidently rather than barriers that restrict your movement. This shift in perspective transforms how you approach challenging work. Instead of relying solely on willpower and motivation, you learn to design environments and systems that make success your default outcome. The focus moves from forcing yourself to maintain momentum to creating conditions where momentum maintains itself. The most effective accountability structures operate on a spectrum rather than as binary choices. Light accountability might involve simply tracking your progress in a visible way. Moderate accountability could mean regular check-ins with a colleague or mentor. Intensive accountability might include financial stakes or public commitments. The key is matching the level of external structure to your current needs and resistance patterns. Think of accountability like a prosthetic device for your prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for long-term planning and impulse control. Just as a prosthetic leg doesn't make someone weak, but rather empowers them to walk, proper accountability doesn't make you dependent, but rather enables you to achieve what matters most to you consistently. Some resist external accountability based on concerns about authenticity or independence. Yet research shows that well-designed accountability actually increases your sense of autonomy by helping you align your actions with your true priorities. It's the difference between a cage that restricts movement and a structure that enables it, like a greenhouse that creates optimal conditions for growth. The key lies in designing accountability systems that work with your psychology rather than against it. This means understanding your specific patterns of resistance, identifying your optimal support levels, and creating structures that feel empowering rather than controlling. When accountability is properly calibrated, completion becomes easier than quitting. The path of least resistance leads toward your goals rather than away from them. This fundamentally alters the default outcome when motivation inevitably fluctuates, ensuring that temporary dips in drive don't derail your most important work. This transform in how you approach follow-through creates lasting change at the identity level. As you consistently complete what you start, you naturally begin to see yourself as someone who reliably delivers on commitments. This identity shift makes future follow-through progressively easier, creating an upward spiral of capability and confidence. Chapter 18. The Identity Shift. Throughout this journey, you've discovered powerful frameworks for cultivating focused attention, from environmental design and trigger systems to clarity practices and accountability structures. Yet the most profound transformation occurs not through what you do, but through who you become in the process. This final chapter reveals how identity-based change creates sustainable shifts that make focus your natural state, rather than something you must constantly force. Consider how your current relationship with focus likely stems from deeply held beliefs about who you are. I'm easily distracted. I'm not good at finishing things, or I can't focus like other people can. These self-concepts aren't fixed traits, but accumulated interpretations of past experiences. The transformative insight is that new experiences, properly structured and consistently repeated, gradually rewrite these limiting beliefs into empowering identities. The science of identity-based habits reveals why behavior driven by self-concept requires dramatically less willpower than behavior driven by external goals or rules. When you act from a place of, "This is who I am," rather than, "This is what I should do," the internal resistance that typically demands constant energy simply dissolves. The key lies in understanding that identity forms through consistent experiences rather than declarations or decisions. Think of identity as a path worn into a field through repeated walking. Each focus session, properly designed and successfully completed, creates a slightly deeper groove in this path. Over time, following this path becomes the obvious choice. Not because you're forcing yourself, but because it's the most natural way forward. This is why proper sequencing of small wins proves essential for authentic transformation. All the frameworks you've learned contribute to this identity shift when implemented consistently. Environmental design shapes the space where your new identity can flourish. Resistance decoding helps you understand and work with your mind's natural tendencies. Trigger systems create reliable entry points into focus states. Clarity practices eliminate the friction that typically fragments attention. The ultimate resolution to procrastination comes through becoming someone who naturally focuses rather than someone who must constantly battle distraction. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle where each focused session strengthens your focused identity, making subsequent sessions progressively easier and more natural. Several specific practices accelerate this identity transformation. First, adjust your language patterns, both internal dialogue and external communication, to reflect your emerging identity rather than your past limitations. Instead of, "I'm trying to focus more," say, "I'm becoming someone who naturally focuses deeply." This subtle shift signals to your brain that change is already underway. Second, strategically create identity conflicts that challenge limiting beliefs. When you catch yourself thinking, "I'm not good at focusing," intentionally recall evidence that contradicts this belief. Times when you've maintained deep concentration or completed challenging work. This cognitive dissonance helps dislodge old self-concepts and create space for new ones. Third, carefully curate your environment to reinforce your emerging identity. Physical reminders, carefully chosen tools, and designated spaces all send consistent messages about who you're becoming. Your workspace should reflect the identity of someone who engages in deep, focused work rather than someone struggling against distraction. Fourth, practice selective storytelling, both to yourself and others, that emphasizes moments of alignment with your desired identity, while reframing apparent setbacks as learning opportunities rather than evidence of limitation. The stories you tell literally shape who you become. This identity-based approach fundamentally differs from trying to force yourself to focus through pure willpower. Rather than fighting against who you are, you're gradually becoming someone for whom focus feels natural and aligned. This transformation doesn't require perfection. In fact, expecting perfection often undermines authentic change. The ultimate goal isn't to eliminate all distraction or maintain constant focus. Rather, it's to develop such a strong foundation of identity-aligned habits that temporary fluctuations in focus don't threaten your fundamental relationship with deep work. Like a skilled gardener who knows that seasonal changes don't negate their fundamental capacity to cultivate growth. You develop an unshakable trust in your ability to direct attention where it matters most. This brings us full circle to the garden metaphor that opened our journey. Just as a well-tended garden transforms not just the landscape, but the gardener themselves, your practice of cultivating focused attention gradually transforms your fundamental identity. The borders you establish, the triggers you implement, the resistance you decode, all these elements work together to nurture not just periods of focus, but a self-concept for whom focus becomes the natural way of being. Conclusion. Throughout this journey, you've discovered that focus isn't something you achieve through force, but something that emerges naturally when you create the right conditions. Like a well-tended garden where water flows effortlessly through carefully designed channels, your attention moves naturally toward what matters most, when proper boundaries, pathways, and cultivation work together as an integrated system. The various frameworks introduced, the focus triggers framework, the completion threshold, the momentum principle, the clarity engine, are not isolated techniques, but interconnected elements that support and enhance each other. Just as a garden soil quality, sunlight exposure, and irrigation system must work in harmony, these frameworks create a self-reinforcing ecosystem where focus becomes your default state rather than an exhausting achievement. Maintaining this system requires ongoing attention and adjustment, much like a garden needs regular care, yet the rewards far exceed the effort invested. Beyond increased productivity, you experience the deep satisfaction of consistent completion, the joy of immersive flow states, and the quiet confidence that comes from reliable follow-through. Your mental landscape transforms from a chaotic wilderness into a cultivated space where your most important work naturally flourishes. You might worry that implementing this system requires perfection or that missing certain elements will negate its benefits. But remember that gardens thrive even when not perfectly maintained. Even partial implementation of these frameworks creates meaningful improvement. Each small adjustment to your environment, each clarity-enhancing question, each properly designed transition adds to the cumulative effect of enhanced focus. Your past struggles with distraction don't predict your future relationship with focus. This transformation isn't about becoming someone different, but about arranging your world to work with who you already are. Like water naturally flowing downhill, your attention wants to move along paths of least resistance. By understanding and working with these natural tendencies rather than fighting against them, you make focus inevitable. You now possess everything needed to create a life where your most important work not only gets done, but becomes the natural expression of who you are. The wilderness of distraction will always exist, but your garden of attention can become an unshakable sanctuary where focus flourishes not through heroic discipline, but through intelligent alignment. The path forward isn't about perfect execution, but consistent cultivation. Each day presents new opportunities to strengthen your focus ecosystem, to refine your systems, and to deepen your understanding of how these elements work together. Trust in this process, knowing that small, well-designed adjustments gradually transform your entire experience of work and attention. Let this be your guide as you continue cultivating your own focused path. The landscape of your attention awaits transformation, ready to become a space where your most meaningful work naturally thrives. Thank you for listening and for investing in yourself. I believe in you. Your potential is endless. Thank you for listening and for investing in yourself. I believe in you. Your potential is endless. Now go out there and create the life you deserve.